What if your dream vacation turned into a fight for survival? These 10 disasters prove that even billion-dollar vessels aren't immune to catastrophe. Every year, over 30 million people set sail on cruise ships, trusting these floating cities with their lives. Most return with nothing but fond memories and vacation photos. But for thousands of others, their voyage became a nightmare they'd never forget. From engine fires that turned ships into floating toilets, to storms that nearly sent vessels crashing into rocks, to captains who abandoned ship while passengers drowned. Number 10. Celebrity Mercury. Picture this. You're on a 12-day luxury cruise, sipping cocktails by the pool, then your stomach starts churning. In 2010, a nightmare scenario unfolded aboard the Celebrity Mercury. A highly contagious norovirus outbreak swept through the ship like wildfire. 446 passengers, nearly 1 in 6, fell violently ill with nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. But here's where it gets worse. They were trapped. Stuck at sea with nowhere to go, the cruise line ordered infected passengers to remain in their cramped cabins. For days, they suffered in isolation while the ship slowly made its way to port. The cruise line offered vouchers for future cruises, but after that experience, most passengers probably never wanted to see another ship again. Number 9. Queen of the North. March 22, 2006. The Queen of the North was making a routine overnight journey through British Columbia's Inside Passage. At 12:25 a.m., the ferry was supposed to make a critical turn. It didn't. The vessel slammed into Gill Island at full speed. Within minutes, water was flooding in. All 101 passengers and crew scrambled into the freezing March waters of the Pacific Northwest. The ship went down in just over an hour. 99 people were rescued, but 2 passengers were never found. The investigation revealed a chilling truth: human error. The crew had failed to follow basic navigational protocols. One simple missed turn cost 2 people their lives and sent a $30 million vessel to the ocean floor. Number 8. Carnival Triumph. February 10, 2013. Over 4,000 passengers boarded the Carnival Triumph for what should have been a 4-day Mexican getaway. But 150 miles off the coast of Mexico, fire erupted in the engine room. The entire ship lost power. No lights, no air conditioning, no running water, and most critically, no working toilets. What happened next earned this disaster the nickname the Poop Cruise. For 8 days, thousands of passengers were forced to use plastic bags for their waste. Human sewage leaked through the ceilings. The stench below decks became unbearable as temperatures soared past 100 degrees. Desperate passengers abandoned their cabins and slept on open decks, creating tent cities just to breathe fresh air. Tugboats finally towed the powerless vessel to Mobile, Alabama. When passengers finally disembarked, many literally kissed the ground. Carnival called it an unfortunate incident. Passengers called it traumatic, and the internet? They made sure this cruise would never be forgotten. Number 7. Anthem of the Seas. Royal Caribbean's Anthem of the Seas was a technological marvel, one of the most advanced cruise ships ever built. But in February 2016, it was sent directly into the path of a megastorm. Hurricane-force winds reached 150 miles per hour. Waves towered 30 feet high. The 168,000-ton vessel was tossed like a toy in a bathtub. Inside, chaos erupted. Furniture and debris flew across the decks. Passengers in their cabins heard the groaning of metal as the ship flexed and twisted. All 4,500 people aboard were confined to their cabins, listening to the howling wind and praying the ship would hold together. The ship eventually returned to port safely. But one question haunted investigators. Why was it sent into the storm in the first place? The forecast was available. The danger was known. Yet the cruise line ordered the ship to sail anyway. Number 6. Viking Sky. March 23, 2019. The Viking Sky was cruising Norway's coastline when something every sailor fears happened. The engines died. All of them. Stranded in a violent storm with 1,373 people aboard, the ship drifted helplessly toward Norway's rocky shoreline. 100 meters. That's all that stood between the Viking Sky and total destruction. As waves crashed over the deck and the ship listed dangerously, helicopters were scrambled for emergency evacuation. One by one, 479 passengers were airlifted off in terrifying rescue operations. Elderly passengers, some in their 80s and 90s, were hoisted through hurricane-force winds into helicopters hovering above the violently rolling ship. Then, with barely meters to spare, the crew managed to restart one engine. The ship inched away from the rocks, averting what would have been one of the worst cruise disasters in modern history. But here's what investigators discovered. The disaster was preventable. Low lubricating oil levels caused the engines to fail. A basic maintenance check could have saved 1,373 people from this nightmare. Number 5. MS Estonia, September 28, 1994. The MS Estonia departed Tallinn, heading for Stockholm with 989 people aboard. At 1:15 a.m., as passengers slept, the ship's bow door, designed to load cars, failed. The frigid Baltic Sea rushed onto the car deck. Within minutes, the Estonia listed severely. Then it capsized. From the first breach to complete capsizing, just 35 minutes. In the freezing water, just above 50 degrees Fahrenheit, survival time was measured in minutes, not hours. Of 989 people aboard, only 137 survived. 852 people died in one of Europe's worst peacetime maritime disasters. The investigation revealed fatal design flaws in car ferries. The bow doors, essential for loading vehicles, created a massive vulnerability. If they failed, there was no time to react. The disaster forced a complete overhaul of ferry safety regulations across Europe. But for 852 people, those changes came too late. Number 4. Eastern Star, June 1st, 2015. The Eastern Star carried 454 passengers, most of them retirees in their 60s and 70s, on what should have been a peaceful river cruise through China. Then the weather turned deadly. A severe storm, possibly including a tornado, struck the vessel with catastrophic force. The Eastern Star capsized in minutes. When rescuers arrived, they found the ship completely inverted, its hull jutting from the water like a steel island. Only 14 people survived. 440 died. Search teams expanded their operation to 600 miles, using forensics to identify victims pulled from the river. But here's what investigators discovered. The Eastern Star was doomed before the storm even hit. The vessel's top-heavy construction made it dangerously unstable. In rough weather, it was only a matter of time before physics took over. The storm didn't sink the Eastern Star. Poor design did. The storm just exposed the fatal flaw. Number 3. SS Eastland, July 24th, 1915. Just 3 years after the Titanic shocked the world, another disaster was about to unfold. This time not in the middle of the ocean, but feet from the dock. The SS Eastland sat in the Chicago River, preparing to take 2,573 passengers on a Lake Michigan excursion. As passengers boarded, the ship began tilting to its port side. It righted itself momentarily, then continued tilting. Water rushed through gangways and into the hull. Then, in full view of horrified onlookers on shore, the Eastland rolled completely onto its side. People were thrown into the river. Others were trapped below decks as the ship rolled over them. 844 people died. Many of them were within sight of their families on the dock, close enough to hear their screams. The cause? In a cruel twist of irony, safety regulations implemented after the Titanic. Ship operators had packed the Eastland's decks with extra lifeboats and safety equipment, desperate to avoid another Titanic. But in doing so, they made the vessel top-heavy and unstable. The very measures meant to save lives created the conditions for one of America's deadliest maritime disasters. The Eastland story reveals a harsh truth. Sometimes the cure is worse than the disease. Number 2. Costa Concordia, January 13th, 2012. The Costa Concordia, a floating palace carrying over 4,200 passengers and crew, was supposed to perform a sail-by salute near the Italian island of Giglio. But Captain Francesco Schettino took the ship too close, dangerously close. At 9:45 p.m., the ship struck a rock formation, tearing a 160-foot gash in the hull. Water gushed into the engine rooms. All power was lost. The massive vessel began tilting. Passengers stumbled through tilting corridors, plates and furniture sliding past them. But here's where the disaster turned into a scandal. Captain Schettino didn't order evacuation for over an hour after impact. An hour. While the ship listed more and more severely, precious evacuation time slipped away. When the order finally came, passengers struggled to reach lifeboats on the tilting vessel. And then came the moment that shocked the world. Captain Schettino abandoned ship, while passengers were still trapped aboard. An Italian Coast Guard captain, Gregorio De Falco, made a desperate radio call that became infamous. Schettino claimed he fell into a lifeboat. He was later found on shore, making phone calls, while people died on his ship. 32 people died. Hundreds more were injured. Schettino was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 16 years in prison. The maritime world had a new term: doing a Schettino, abandoning ship when you're needed most. The salvage operation took 2 years and cost $2 billion, one of the largest and most expensive in maritime history. Number 1. Titanic. April 10th, 1912. The RMS Titanic, the largest, most luxurious ship ever built, set sail from Southampton on its maiden voyage to New York. They called it unsinkable. That arrogance would doom 1,503 people. On the night of April 14th, 4 days into the voyage, lookouts spotted something in the darkness, an iceberg. At 11:40 p.m., the Titanic scraped along the iceberg's submerged edge, opening the hull to the sea. Water flooded 5 forward compartments. The ship's designer, Thomas Andrews, made a devastating calculation. The Titanic had 2 hours to live. But here's the fatal flaw. The Titanic carried enough life jackets for everyone aboard. But lifeboats? Only enough for 1,178 people. Over 2,200 people were on board. Half of them had no chance. As the ship's bow sank lower, chaos erupted. Some lifeboats left half empty while third-class passengers were trapped below decks behind locked gates. At 2:20 a.m., the Titanic's stern rose nearly vertical. Then it snapped in two. 1,500 people plunged into the North Atlantic. The water temperature? 28 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, unconsciousness comes in 15 minutes, death in 30 to 45 minutes. Survivors in lifeboats listened to the screams of the dying, then, gradually, silence. The rescue ship Carpathia arrived at dawn. Of the 2,224 people aboard the Titanic, only 710 survived. The disaster sparked immediate change. New laws required enough lifeboats for everyone. The International Ice Patrol was established. Radio watch became mandatory 24/7. Every safety regulation on modern cruise ships exists because of the Titanic. Every lifeboat drill, every safety demonstration, every emergency protocol, all born from this disaster. Over a century later, the Titanic still rests on the ocean floor, 2.5 miles down. A steel monument to humanity's deadliest lesson. Nature doesn't care how advanced you think you are. 10 disasters. thousands of lives lost, billions of dollars in damage. Today's cruise ships are safer than ever, with technology the Titanic's designers couldn't imagine. Satellite weather tracking, GPS navigation, automated distress systems, double hulls, advanced fire suppression. But technology alone isn't enough. Because these disasters teach us something critical. The human element remains the biggest variable. Poor decisions, ignored warnings, neglected maintenance, corporate pressure to stay on schedule. Every year, 30 million people trust these vessels with their lives. For most, that trust is rewarded with an amazing vacation. But these 10 disasters remind us, when things go wrong on a ship, there's nowhere to run. You're trapped in the middle of the ocean, dependent entirely on the crew's training, the ship's design, and sometimes pure luck. The ocean doesn't forgive mistakes. It doesn't care about billion-dollar engineering or corporate profits. Every one of these disasters forced the maritime industry to confront uncomfortable truths and implement changes. Safety regulations written in tragedy. If you found this video eye-opening, subscribe to Unfiltered Discovery for more deep dives into the events that changed our world. Next time, the engineering disasters that should have been impossible.